The auditorium buzzed with energy. Rows of proud families filled every seat, faces glowing with pride and expectation. I smoothed the front of my best dress, the one I'd saved up for just for today, and checked my reflection in a tiny compact mirror. At 65, decades of juggling 3 jobs had left deep lines on my face, especially around the eyes, but today those wrinkles framed something else: pride. "Mrs. Dalton, would you like some water?" a young usher asked gently, probably noticing the way my hands shook. "Oh no thank you, sweetie," I said, tucking a loose strand of gray hair behind my ear. "Just nerves. It's a big day." And it was. 28 years of sacrifice had all led to this moment. When Mason was born, I swore I'd give him everything I never had. His father walked out when Mason was just 5, leaving behind unpaid bills and a house full of silence. I still remember that night like it was yesterday, sitting at the kitchen table alone after Mason had gone to bed, staring at an empty checkbook and wondering how I'd make it work. That was the night I made a promise to myself. No matter what it took, I'd build a better future for my son. The very next day I picked up an extra shift. And from there the years just blurred. Mornings cleaning offices, afternoons answering phones at a small-town clinic, nights waiting tables at the diner down on Maple Street. Even on days when I came home barely able to stand, I still made time to help Mason with his homework. I watched his grades rise, saw the fire light up in his eyes when he talked about becoming a doctor. The day he got accepted into med school, I cried like a baby. I added a 3rd job after that. Sleep? That became a luxury. My bones ached, my back constantly sore, but the thought of Mason in a white coat kept me going. Now, as the ceremony began and the sea of graduates streamed in, I scanned the crowd, trying to find my boy in all those matching caps and gowns. When I finally spotted him, I could hardly breathe. He looked so handsome, so proud. And for a moment I let myself believe, just for a second, that we'd made it. Together. The dean started speaking, but I couldn't hear much over the rush of memories playing in my head. Mason, just a little boy, pretending to check his teddy bear's heartbeat with a toy stethoscope. Before I knew it, tears were rolling down my cheeks. After the ceremony, I pushed through the crowd to find him. He was surrounded by a polished group of young professionals and their families, all dressed like magazine ads. I waved when I caught his eye, my heart ready to burst. But the smile he gave me wasn't the one I expected. It was quick. Shallow. A little embarrassed even. So I moved closer. "Mason," I called, reaching to hug him. He stepped back just a little, not rude but just enough. "Mom." "Hi. You made it." Something felt off. His eyes didn't have the warmth I knew. Before I could ask anything, a tall, sleek woman in her 40s appeared beside him. She wore a dress that probably cost more than my car. With a graceful smile, she placed a hand on Mason's arm and said, "Darling, aren't you going to introduce me to your friends?" Her voice was smooth, effortless. Mason's whole face lit up, brighter than it had when he saw me. "Everyone, this is Lauren," he said proudly. "This is my mother. The woman who made me who I am today." And just like that, the world slipped out from under me. The group murmured, nodding at her, congratulating her. Lauren smiled, soaking up the praise like she'd earned it. No one corrected anything. A girl turned to me with a polite but confused look. "And you are?" I opened my mouth but nothing came out. Mason glanced at me, then said quickly, "This is Helen. She's a family friend. She's been very supportive." Family friend. 28 years of backbreaking work boiled down to 2 words. Family friend. I couldn't breathe. Everything blurred. I looked at him, my boy, standing beside a stranger, arm wrapped around her like she was the one who'd been there all along. Something cracked inside me. But something else lit up too. I took a step forward. "Actually," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. Mason froze. Lauren's smile flickered. "I have something to say," I went on louder this time. The crowd fell silent. "I'm Mason's mother," I said clearly. "His biological mother." You could have heard a pin drop. People turned to look at us, eyes darting between me and Lauren. Her perfectly polished hand dropped from Mason's arm. "Helen," Mason said through clenched teeth. "Maybe we should talk about this in private." "I think we're past private, don't you?" I said, surprised at my own calm. "For 28 years I scrubbed floors and washed dishes to get you through school. I've worked 3 jobs since the day you got into med school. My hands are raw, my back's permanently hunched, but I made sure you never went without. I turned to the others. I'm not asking for applause. I just won't be erased. Lauren cleared her throat. Mason has lived with his father and me since he was 17. We've supported him all through college and med school. Supported him? I let out a laugh that had no joy in it. With what? The money I sent every month? The loans I'm still paying off? For a second, something flickered across Mason's face. Guilt, maybe. His friends looked uncomfortable. Mom, please, he whispered. Then Lauren added, my husband, his stepfather, paid for Mason's undergrad. I know you helped pay for his degree, I said honestly, and I'm grateful for that, truly. But that doesn't erase the 17 years that came before. The nights I stayed up rocking him through fevers, the baseball games I rushed to after working double shifts, the science projects we built together at the kitchen table. I reached into my old worn purse and pulled out a small folded piece of paper. Do you remember this? Mason's eyes widened as I carefully unfolded the crayon drawing. A stick figure in a doctor's coat, scribbled in uneven 9-year-old handwriting above it. When I'm a doctor, I'll buy my mom a big house so she never has to work again. I've kept this all these years, I said, my voice softening. It got me through more than you'll ever know. The crowd around us had gone completely quiet. Lauren looked away, her picture-perfect image starting to crack. One of Mason's friends, a young woman with gentle eyes, reached out and gave my arm a quiet squeeze. Then Mason did something I hadn't expected. He took a step away from Lauren and moved toward me. Mom, he said, voice trembling, I'm sorry. I didn't think. You're right, I replied, not unkindly. You didn't. But I need to understand, why? After everything, why would you introduce her as your mother? Why would you call me a family friend? His answer hit harder than I was ready for. Because I was ashamed, he whispered. The words knocked the wind out of me. Ashamed. I echoed. He kept his eyes down. Not of you exactly, but of where I came from. The tiny apartment. Your 3 jobs. How hard life was for us. These people, he motioned to his polished upper-crust friends, they come from money, parents who are doctors, lawyers, business owners. I wanted to fit in. So, I asked quietly, you borrowed someone else's mother? Mason glanced toward Lauren. Amber and Richard took me in after Dad reached out. They gave me a room in their home, introduced me to the right people. It all just felt easier than the life we had. I'm sorry, Mom. I guess I wanted to be someone else. That truth, raw and painful, hung between us like thick fog. For the first time, I didn't see the polished doctor in his cap and gown. I saw my little boy again, still trying to find his place in a world that didn't come easy. I let out a slow breath. I understand that, Mason. More than you know. There were so many days I wished I could be someone else, too. But the one thing I never wanted to change was being your mother. His eyes filled with tears. Some of his friends had quietly stepped away, giving us room. Lauren now stood off to the side, her flawless mask completely shattered. A young man still nearby stepped forward and held out his hand. Mrs. Dalton? He asked. I'm Josh. I've been Mason's roommate for 4 years. I shook his hand, a bit confused. It's an honor to meet the woman who raised such a brilliant doctor, he said. Mason's told me all about your sacrifices. He has? I asked. Josh nodded. Yeah. Lots of nights when everyone else was asleep, we'd be up studying. He'd talk about you. How you never gave up on him. I turned to Mason. Then why this whole charade? Before he could answer, a man in a tailored suit stepped into our circle. He placed a hand around Lauren's waist and clapped Mason on the back. There's my graduate, he beamed. Dr. Mitchell, fresh out the gate. I already spoke to Dr. Harrington about a spot for you. Big salary, son. Then he turned to me and held out a hand. Richard Mitchell. You must be one of Mason's professors. Before I could speak, Lauren laid a hand on his arm. Richard, this is Helen. She's Mason's mother. His cheerful expression faltered. His mother. But I thought. It's complicated, Lauren said quickly. Richard looked between Mason and me, clearly puzzled. Mason, what's going on? My son finally looked up, his face unreadable. There's something I need to tell you, he said, voice tight. Something I never told either of you. The tension around us could have been cut with a knife. Richard, Mason began slowly, when my father reached out to you 8 years ago, He didn't tell you the whole truth. Richard's brow furrowed. What do you mean? Your dad and I were college roommates. He said you needed a place to stay to finish school, that your mother, he glanced at me apologetically, was struggling to make ends meet. That part was true, Mason said. But Dad didn't call because he cared. He called because he needed money. Lauren's sculpted brows shot up. Mason, what are you saying? He took a breath. My father never paid a dime in child support. He left us when I was 5. Just disappeared. And we didn't hear from him again until I was 17. When he finally did show up, I was thrilled. I thought maybe he'd changed. Maybe he finally wanted to be my dad. I closed my eyes, remembering the way Mason had smiled that day. How he'd rushed to meet his father at the diner, so full of hope. He told me he wanted to help me reach my goals, Mason continued. That he had connections to help me get into a good college. Then he introduced me to you and Lauren. But what you don't know is that before any of that, he came to our apartment. He asked my mom for money. All eyes turned to me. Yes, I said quietly. Harrison, that's Mason's father, showed up out of nowhere. Said he was in trouble. Said he needed $10,000. Back then I could barely pay the bills. When I told him I couldn't give him the money he wanted, he left in a rage. The very next day he called Mason directly. Richard's expression had turned darker with every sentence. Go on, he urged Mason quietly. Dad made me a deal, Mason said, his voice hollow. He said he'd introduce me to his successful friend who could help my future. But in return I had to help him get money from that friend. Lauren gasped. Are you saying Harrison used you to get money from us? Mason nodded miserably. At first it was just a college fund he said he'd borrow from. But then it turned into more. He asked me to request money for textbooks, rent, medical supplies. I sent some of it to him, but not all. I was stuck trying to please him without completely taking advantage of your kindness. And your mother? Richard asked, glancing in my direction. Where was she in all this? I never told her, Mason admitted, eyes low. I was embarrassed. I didn't want her to know I was in contact with Dad again. She spent so many years protecting me from him. I didn't want to break that. Hearing that, it shattered my heart all over again. All those years and he'd been carrying that burden alone. Why didn't you come to us? Lauren asked gently. We would have helped you without all this manipulation. Because by the time I realized what was really going on, I was already in too deep, Mason said quietly. And then I started liking the life you gave me. The beautiful house, the connections, the way everything came so easily. It was nothing like what I grew up with. And I convinced myself I deserved it, after everything. He turned to me then, his face streaked with tears. And I started to resent you, Mom. Not because you did anything wrong, but because you reminded me of everything I was trying so hard to forget. How poor we were, how hard it always was, how I never felt like I belonged. Those words cut deep. But I couldn't deny they were true. When was the last time you talked to your father? Richard asked, his lawyer instincts clearly clicking into gear. 3 months ago, Mason answered. He called asking for more money. Said he had gambling debts. When I refused, he threatened to tell you everything. I've been terrified ever since. Richard's stern face softened. Mason, you're not the first young man to be manipulated by someone who should have protected him. But this lie has lasted long enough. He turned to Lauren. We need to talk. In private. Lauren nodded, her usual polished calm replaced by something more real. She looked at me, her expression mixed with guilt and apology. Helen, I never meant to hurt you. I truly didn't know. It's not your fault, I said, and realized I meant it. You've been kind to my son. That's what matters. As the two of them stepped aside, I was left standing there with Mason. All around us the celebration carried on. Music, laughter, camera flashes. But for us, everything felt still. Quiet. I don't even know what to say, Mason whispered. I've made such a mess of everything. I looked at him and asked the question I'd carried in my heart for years. Why didn't you come to me? Why carry this alone? I thought I was protecting you, he said, voice trembling. At least that's what I told myself. But truth is, I was protecting the version of myself I was trying to build. The polished doctor with the perfect background. Not the kid whose mom cleaned houses to pay rent. I reached for his hand. Still the same hand I'd held as he crossed the street, the one I'd bandaged after playground scrapes. The same hand I'd watched sign medical school applications. Mason, I said softly, do you know what I see when I look at you in that gown? I see the most beautiful success story. A boy who overcame everything, who worked just as hard as his mother to build a life that wasn't handed to him. But I lied, he choked out. I betrayed you. I used Richard and Lauren. Yes, I said gently. You made mistakes. Big ones. But this isn't the end of your story. It's just a chapter. What matters is what you do with the next one. Mason turned toward Richard and Lauren, who had finished their conversation and were walking back toward us, their faces serious but not hostile. I think I just lost the only other family I had, he said quietly. I followed his gaze. Richard gave a firm nod while Lauren wiped her eyes. You haven't lost me, I told him, squeezing his hand. And you never will. Richard reached us first, face solemn. Mason, he said, Amber and I have made a decision. Mason stood straighter, bracing for whatever came next. I understand. I broke your trust. I accept that. But Richard cut him off. We want you both to come to dinner tomorrow night. There's a lot we need to talk through, and a few changes that need to happen, but most importantly we want to move forward. Honestly. Mason blinked in disbelief. You're not cutting me off? No, Lauren said, stepping beside Richard. But we are going to have an open conversation. Everything will be on the table, especially your father's role in all of this. Then she turned to me, her voice softer. Helen, we owe you an apology. We were part of something that hurt you deeply, even if we didn't realize it. That was never our intention. I nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. For now, Richard added, this young man needs to have the conversation he should have had years ago, with his mother. We'll see you both tomorrow at 7. As they walked away, Mason looked at me, his eyes a mix of relief and fear. Mom, there's more I need to tell you. About Dad. About everything. Most of the crowd had cleared out, families drifting off to their dinners and celebrations. Mason and I found a quiet bench tucked in the corner of the reception hall. I'm listening, I said, bracing myself. I knew whatever came next wouldn't be easy to hear. Mason inhaled deeply and finally spoke, words that would shake everything I thought I understood about our past. Mom, he began, gripping his hands tightly in his lap, there's something I never told you. About the night Dad left. My entire body tensed. That night had been the line everything in our lives split across, before and after Harrison walked out. I'd spent years trying to shield Mason from the worst parts of it. Clearly I'd missed something. I was supposed to be asleep, he said, voice low. But I heard you two arguing. I snuck out of bed, crept down the hallway and watched through the banister. I closed my eyes. I could still see it, the fight, the fury. Harrison had emptied our bank account again. When I confronted him, he exploded. Called me controlling. Said I was suffocating him. He was yelling that you were the reason he never succeeded, Mason said. That if it weren't for us, he could have had the life he wanted. And then he saw me watching. You didn't notice. But he did. My breath caught in my throat. What did he do? I asked quietly. After you went into the kitchen, he came over to me, Mason said. He crouched down and told me, your mom is why we're poor, Davy. Don't forget that. She's gonna drag you down just like she dragged me down. But someday when you're older, I'll come back for you. We'll show her. My heart stopped. He said that to you? I whispered. You were 5 years old. Mason nodded slowly. And those words, they stayed with me. Even though I saw how hard you worked, there was always this tiny voice in my head. His voice. Blaming you. And when he came back into your life at 17, I started. Part of me still wanted his approval, Mason admitted. He told me he'd turned his life around. That he could help me succeed, if I stepped away from everything we'd built. The pain hit me like a wave. All those years I thought I was protecting my son, and he'd been carrying poison in his heart. After he introduced me to Richard and Lauren, I saw how easy their world was, Mason continued. Clean, quiet, full of opportunity. Dad encouraged me to lean into that, to become someone new. Not your son, but someone they could shape. Trade up, I repeated bitterly. His words, Mason said quickly. Not mine. But I was 17. Impressed. And Richard and Lauren, they were nothing like us. They traveled. They knew important people. Dad told me this was my shot to start over. So the weekends you spent at their house, your dad arranged all of that? Mason nodded. He told me how to act, what to say. Said if I could make them see me as part of their world, they'd invest in my future in ways you never could. I flinched. Mason reached for my hand. I know now how wrong that was. But back then med school costs terrified me. Richard offered to help and I took it. He let out a breath. That's when I started living a double life. Their stand-in son on holidays, yours the rest of the time. And they had no idea? I asked. No, Mason said. They just thought they were helping some ambitious kid from a rough background. I let them believe you were unstable. That you couldn't support my education. Each word was another stab to the heart. And the money? I asked. The extra funds your dad was taking? Not all of it, Mason said. But Richard set up an education fund. Dad pressured me to request more. Said it was for books, housing, lab equipment. I'd pull the cash and hand it to him. How much? Over the years? He swallowed hard. Probably close to 50,000. I gasped. Mason, that's theft. He manipulated you into stealing from the people who wanted to help you. I know, he said, nearly choking on the words. At first I was too scared to say no. Later, I was too ashamed to admit what was happening. And Richard and Lauren, they treated you like their own. They did, he said, eyes heavy. They brought me into their world. It felt easier to pretend I belonged there than face what I'd done. And where does that leave us? I asked quietly. Where does that leave the 28 years I gave up everything for you? Tears spilled down Mason's cheeks. When I saw you standing there today, in that dress I know you scraped and saved to buy, it all collided. The world I built with them and the one you and I lived through, they couldn't exist together. So I made a terrible choice. I chose the lie. He covered his face. And the second it came out of my mouth, I hated myself for it. But I couldn't take it back, not without destroying everything. We sat in silence. The truth, heavy and unrelenting, lay between us. Where is your father now? I asked. I don't know, Mason said. After I refused to give him more money, he disappeared. His numbers disconnected. But I'm afraid he'll show up at dinner tomorrow. Try to get to Richard. I sat up straighter. Let him try, I said calmly. It's time the truth came out. All of it. Mason looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time. How are you still this strong? After everything I did, and everything he did. Because that's what mothers do, I said. We keep going. We face the storm. And we never, ever, give up on our children. Even when our children give up on us, we don't stop being their mothers. For the first time since the ceremony, Mason really looked at me. Not past me. Not through me. Just at me. I never deserved you, he whispered. That's not how love works, I said. It's never been about deserving. We left the reception hall side by side, walking slowly through the quiet campus where Mason had spent the last 4 years becoming someone new. The spring air was soft, filled with the scent of fresh blooms and possibility. What do we do now? Mason asked as we reached my old, scratched-up sedan, parked awkwardly among shiny SUVs and sleek luxury cars. Now, I said, unlocking the door. Now we go home. We get some rest. And tomorrow we face Richard and Lauren. Together. With the truth. He nodded, though doubt still clouded his eyes. And what if he shows up? He asked. Dad, I mean. I thought of Harrison, how he'd vanished when we needed him most, how he came back only to poison Mason's mind and use anyone who dared to care about our son. Then he'll finally have to face what he's done, I said, quiet but sure. Every last bit of it. As we pulled away from campus, I couldn't help wondering what tomorrow would bring. The truth was finally rising after years buried in silence. But some truths come with a cost. And the biggest shock? That was still waiting for us. The Mitchell estate was exactly as Mason had described it. Grand, sprawling, almost too perfect to be real. I smoothed down my second-best dress, the one I'd been saving for something meaningful. Ready? Mason asked, looking every bit as nervous as I felt. Together, I replied, giving his hand a small squeeze. Lauren opened the door herself, dressed down from the graduation but still effortlessly elegant. Helen Mason. Please come in, she said, her voice warmer than I expected. The inside of their home was breathtaking, Vaulted ceilings, curated artwork, furniture that probably cost more than my car. But instead of leading us to a formal dining room, she brought us to a sunroom tucked at the back of the house. "I thought we might be more comfortable here," she said, gesturing to where Richard waited with a bottle of wine and 4 glasses. "Thank you," I said, honestly touched by the gesture. Once we were seated, Richard cleared his throat. "Before we begin," he said, "I want to make something clear. Lauren and I have talked about this a lot. Yes, we're hurt by the lies. But we also know Mason was just a kid when all this began. A scared, impressionable teenager. And he was under the influence of someone we now understand much better." Mason stared down at his untouched wine. "That doesn't excuse what I did." "No," Richard agreed. "But it helps explain it. And now no more secrets. We lay everything out." And so we did. For nearly an hour Mason told them everything. His father's disappearance, the lies, the guilt, the money. I filled in the gaps with pieces from our life before the Mitchells ever entered the picture. Lauren listened, her hands gripping her glass tighter as the story unfolded. "All these years," she said finally, "we thought we were helping you build a future. We had no idea we were being used to bankroll Harrison's gambling habit." "Not everything was a lie," Mason said quickly. "I meant thank you. Every ounce of respect I have for both of you is real. You showed me another world. You believed in me. That saved me in ways you'll never know. But at what cost to your relationship with your mother?" Richard asked, glancing in my direction. Before Mason could respond, the doorbell rang. Lauren frowned. "We're not expecting anyone." Moments later, their housekeeper appeared at the doorway to the sunroom. "Mr. Mitchell, there's a gentleman at the door. He says he's Mason's father. He insists on speaking with you." The room went still. Mason's face turned pale. Richard stood. "Let him in, Martha," he said firmly. "It's time we met the man behind all of this." I had pictured this moment 1,000 times. Still, nothing prepared me for the sight of Harrison walking in. Time had not been kind. His once handsome face was puffy, tired. His expensive suit was wrinkled and out of place. But his swagger, that hadn't aged a day. "Richard, Lauren," he said, arms spread wide like he'd just arrived at a party. "Didn't mean to crash your dinner, but when I heard my son was..." Then he saw me. "Helen, what are you doing here?" "She's here," Richard said, voice ice cold, "because she's Mason's mother. His real mother. In every way that counts." Harrison's eyes narrowed. "I see. So Mason's been spinning stories again." "Not stories," I said, standing tall. "Just the truth." Finally. The charm drained from Harrison's face. "Whatever he told you, it's not the full picture," he snapped. "Helen here always tried to turn him against me. I reconnected with him to fix things." "Save it," Richard cut in. "We know everything. How you manipulated a 17-year-old into siphoning money from us. How you lied. How you tried to destroy his relationship with his own mother." Harrison's gaze darted around the room, but no one backed him. Not even Mason. "Fine," Harrison snapped. "So I used an opportunity. You people have more money than you know what to do with. And the boy needed to toughen up. Learn what the real world's like." "The real world?" I said, stunned. "Mason watched me work 3 jobs just to keep a roof over our heads. Don't you dare talk to him about the real world." Harrison turned on Mason. "You ungrateful little brat. After everything I did to give you a chance." "You didn't give me anything," Mason interrupted, calm and steady. "You took money, trust, time, and you tried to take my relationship with my mom. But you didn't succeed." Harrison's lip curled. "Didn't I? You called Lauren your mother yesterday. Sounds like I did just fine." Mason flinched but didn't break. "That was my failure," he said. "Not your success. And it ends here." "I'm still your father," Harrison said, his voice hard. "You can still walk out of here with me." Before Mason could respond, Richard stood up, voice steady. "Before I call the police and report the financial fraud you've been orchestrating." Harrison's face twisted with fury. "You think you can threaten me? I've got nothing left to lose, Richard. And if I go down, I'll make sure everyone hears how the great philanthropist Richard Mitchell got conned, how you tried to buy yourself a son." Lauren stood now too, her calm demeanor cracking. "No one was trying to buy anything, Harrison. We were trying to help a young man reach his potential. Something his real father should have done." "This is pointless," I said, rising to my feet. Harrison's never taken responsibility for anything. He's not about to start now. He turned to me then, wearing that cruel smile I remembered too well. Speaking of responsibility, Helen, he said, voice dripping with malice, why don't you tell them your little secret? The real reason I left. The room went quiet. My heart pounded. Mom. Mason looked at me, his expression filled with confusion. Harrison's grin widened. See, Richard? That sad little story she tells, about being the abandoned wife, sacrificing everything, it's not the whole picture. I felt the blood drain from my face. Helen had an affair, Harrison declared, triumphant. With my best friend. That's why I left. She betrayed me first. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of a secret I'd carried for over 2 decades. Mom. Mason's voice was uncertain. Is that true? Yes, and no, I said quietly. I did have a relationship with Thomas. But it wasn't an affair. What does that mean? Lauren asked gently. I took a deep breath. Harrison had already left. He emptied our bank account, again, and disappeared. No calls, no support, no word. For 3 months. I thought he was gone for good. Separated isn't divorced, Harrison snapped. You were still my wife. A wife you abandoned, I shot back, along with your 5-year-old son. I turned to Mason. Thomas was kind, stable. Everything your father wasn't. He helped us when we had nothing. And yes, I fell in love with him. For the first time, I felt like maybe we could have a normal life. Then what happened? Mason asked. Your father came back, I said simply. He found out about Thomas and went into a rage. He threatened to take you from me, said no judge would give custody to an adulteress. And back then he might have been right. We had no money to fight him. And in those days the courts usually favored the father, even a father who'd walked out. So, you chose me, Mason said slowly, realization dawning in his eyes. I nodded. Thomas wanted us to fight. But I couldn't risk losing you. So I ended it. And a week later, your father left again. For good, or so I thought. Harrison scoffed. Touching. Playing the victim again, Helen. Why didn't you ever tell me about Thomas? Mason asked, ignoring his father now. At first you were too young. Then, after your dad left again, it just didn't seem necessary to reopen old wounds. And the longer I kept it, the harder it was to explain. I thought I was protecting you. Lauren turned to Harrison, her voice full of contempt. So let me get this straight. You left your family twice, held a relationship over Helen's head that didn't even begin until after you'd abandoned them, and then twisted your son against his mother for years, and now you're acting righteous. Richard walked over and placed a hand on Harrison's shoulder. I think it's time for you to go. Or what? Harrison sneered. Or I call the police, Richard said flatly. Fraud is still a crime, and believe me, we have good lawyers. For the first time, Harrison faltered. He looked around the room, desperate for backup, but found none. His eyes lingered on Mason. You'll regret this, he said coldly. Choosing them over your own father. Mason met his gaze without flinching. The only thing I regret is that it took me this long to see who you really are. Harrison's jaw tightened. Without another word, he turned and stormed out. A few seconds later, the front door slammed. The silence that followed felt cleansing. Heavy but cleansing. Richard was the first to speak. Well, that was enlightening. I'm so sorry, Mason said, glancing at both Richard and Lauren. For everything. Lauren moved to sit beside him. We were all misled by Harrison. And yes, I wish you'd told us sooner, but I understand why you didn't. I looked at them all, unsure of what came next. So, what happens now? Richard leaned forward, his tone calm but serious. First, we make sure Harrison doesn't hurt anyone else. I'll have my legal team investigate everything, especially the money. It might be hard to recover, but he won't get away without consequences. Lauren nodded and turned to me. Helen, we need a fresh start. All of us. Mason looked up, cautious hope flickering in his eyes. What do you mean? I asked softly. You've given 28 years to your son, Lauren said. I've only known him for 8. And while I care deeply for him, I never meant to take your place. If I ever made you feel that way, I'm sorry. You've been good to him, I said sincerely. That's what matters to me. Richard cleared his throat. Mason, we still want to support your career. But from now on, everything must be transparent. No more secrets. No more lies. And no more hiding your mother. Lauren nodded. From now on, she's part of the picture. As she always should have been. Helen is an extraordinary woman, Mason said, his voice thick with emotion, and she deserves to be recognized for everything she's done. He turned to me then, eyes glistening. Mom, can you ever forgive me? I reached across the table and took his hand. I already have, I said softly. But forgiveness doesn't mean the work is done. We still need to rebuild what your father tried so hard to tear down. We stayed long after dinner had ended, talking late into the night. And somewhere in all that conversation something shifted. A new understanding settled between us all. Richard and Lauren hadn't tried to take my place. They were simply people who had grown to love my son, and in their own way, they had helped him reach a dream I'd once thought impossible. As we were getting ready to leave, Lauren touched my arm. Helen, she said, I have a proposition. She explained that she ran a foundation that provided medical care in underserved communities, and that they were in desperate need of someone to coordinate the volunteer program. Someone organized. Someone who understands hard work and sacrifice. Someone like you, she said. I stared at her, stunned. Me? But I don't have a degree or formal qualifications. You raised a doctor while working 3 jobs, she interrupted, smiling. I'd say your qualifications are beyond impressive. Just think about it, please. On the drive home, Mason was quiet. Eventually I asked, what's on your mind? Thomas, he said. Do you ever wonder what happened to him? The question took me by surprise. Sometimes, I admitted. He was a good man. I think we should find him, Mason said suddenly. I want to meet the man who was kind to my mom when she needed it most. I looked at him in surprise. Really? You'd want that? Mom, he said, I've spent too many years running from who we are. I'm done with that. I want to know the whole story, the good, the bad, all of it. We drove in silence for a while, a peaceful quiet. Then Mason asked, back at graduation, when I introduced Lauren as my mother, what were you going to do? I smiled a little. I was going to walk up, shake her hand and say, I'm Helen Gannon. I'm Mason's mother. It's nice to meet you. Simple. Clear. Dignified. He let out a small laugh. That would have been perfect. It's okay, I said. What happened instead was better. It hurt, but the truth finally came out. All of it. 3 months later, I stood in the bright lobby of Riverside Community Hospital, watching the doors nervously. I had accepted Lauren's offer and discovered something I never expected. I was good at this. Organizing medical volunteers. Supporting doctors. Building something meaningful. Today was a milestone. The grand opening of a clinic for low-income families. The door swung open and in walked Mason, dressed in his white coat. On the pocket, Dr. Mason Gannon. He'd chosen to use my last name professionally. When he told me, I cried. Sorry I'm late, he said, hugging me. Is everyone here? They just arrived, I said, nodding toward the sunroom where Richard and Lauren were talking with the hospital's director. As we walked in together, I couldn't help but marvel at how far we'd come. The truth had hurt, but it had set us free. Harrison was facing legal charges for fraud. Mason had begun his medical career, this time surrounded by honesty. And me, I'd found purpose. Not to erase the past, but to honor it. Lauren waved when she spotted us. There they are. Mother and son, the powerhouse team behind today's clinic. Cameras flashed. Mason smiled proudly, put his arm around me and said to everyone gathered, This is my mother, Helen Gannon. Everything I am today, I owe to her. And this time, no one questioned who I was. I had spent 65 years learning that life doesn't always give you what you want. Sometimes it gives you heartbreak, betrayal, and decades of uphill battles. But if you hold on, if you stay brave and keep telling the truth, it can give you something better than you ever imagined. The respect you earned. The peace you fought for. The love that never left. And in the end, that's worth more than any graduation ceremony could ever offer.